Good afternoon and welcome to the CATO Institute. For those of you who don't know, my name is David Bowes. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Institute. I'm glad to have you all here. Glad to have such a good crowd today for an interesting subject. For those of you who hear something you want to follow up on later, I might note that all of our forums are posted on our website, www.cato.org, and usually within 24 hours or so you can either watch or listen to the event from now and on into the future. We're going to discuss a controversial issue today. Why is there an income gap between men and women? And I'm sorry that Larry Summers couldn't be here to comment. Larry Summers is the president of a great university who went to an academic conference and asked an academic question. Why do we observe a gap among men and women at the top ranges of science? And what might be the explanation for that gap? And you've probably all noticed that they have tried to read him out of the university for raising a question. Why do we see this, and what would be the explanation? So I hope that we can have a more serious discussion, if not at Harvard, then at a think tank. Alan Kors wrote in a book a few years ago that one of the reasons think tanks have risen in the past 25 years is that universities have become increasingly intolerant of actual intellectual discussion and increasingly mired in esoterica, deconstructionism, postmodernism, but not in actual scientific and social science examination of real issues with real debate. We hear a lot about various pay gaps between men and women, between blacks and whites, between different other ethnic groups, and we're normally told that discrimination is always the answer. And as you've seen at Harvard, we're told that you shouldn't ask if something else could be the answer. We are indeed told by a senior scientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that she becomes physically ill and unable to breathe if she hears an idea she disagrees with. This is somebody who thinks it's very important to have women in positions like professors at MIT to serve as role models for young women who can learn how to be a scientist. I'm sorry that Larry Summers couldn't be here today. I'm also sorry that a string of leading feminists turned down our invitation to comment on this book. We did invite a number of feminist leaders to come and offer their comments on this book, positive or negative. We're glad to have healthy debate here. I'm sorry they're not here. But maybe Warren Farrell is a leading feminist. He, after all, was elected 3 times to the National Organization for Women board in New York City, so maybe that makes him qualified. Since that time, he's gone on to write a couple of bestsellers, including Why Men Are the Way They Are, The Myth of Male Power. He's been named one of 100 world thought leaders by the Financial Times, and he now has a book out called Why Men Earn More, The Startling Truth Behind the Pay Gap and What Women Can Do About It. And I was just asking him whether the book might be more likely to get positive attention if he had titled it instead, How Women Can Close the Pay Gap. It wouldn't have changed the content of the book because the book attempts to examine why on average men earn more than women and what women can do about it if that's a concern to them as individuals. Please welcome the author of Why Men Earn More, Warren Farrell.
Before I start, I want to thank David Bowes because when I speak up here, it's a very simple process for me to speak for a half hour or whatever, but David has put many, many hours into organizing this and working out the details, and I'd like us to acknowledge the effort he's put into this. Thank you. I'm looking out into this audience, and only about a fraction of you have heard me speak before, but those of you who do know what's going to be coming next, which is that I never give a speech in the normal way of speech giving. I always do something interactive with the audience. And so I'm going to be asking you to work with me today, because you'll get a lot more out of this presentation as you actually experience some of the things I'll be talking about. I'm going to ask all of the men to sit over on this side and all of the women to sit over on this side, and we'll be doing something interactive that will allow us to see the results in relation to a pay gap much more easily. So in case you forgot who you are, it's men over here and women over here, okay? No, I'm being serious. This is just for, yes.
With the men.
This will be a lot of fun. Well, this young woman would like somebody up front with her. She's
Other people, sensing that it's interactive, are fleeing toward the back.
You're right. Nothing that's only intellectual can really be fully experienced. So okay, one of the themes of Why Men Earn More is that in 3 years of researching this issue. Yes, thank you very much. Testing, is that working?
Maria will look into it.
Okay, great. I'm glad we have a technological person that's Maria. Oh, shall I use the one?
Here, let me go find out.
Okay. That is working. Are you working with me? Is it? Yes. Is there a woman here that can do this something technologically here with this? Okay. What I found was that there are 25 differences between what men and women do in the workplace. That each of those differences, on average, lead to men earning more money. But each of those differences also lead to women having better lives. So once again, the women have outsmarted us. So the book, therefore, does not suggest that women should do each of these things, because I obviously want women, I have 2 daughters, I want women to have better lives and men to have better lives. But it suggests that there are 25 significant decisions that when all those decisions are controlled for, that men today actually earn less money than women do for the same work. They earn more money than women do for 25 different types of decisions at work. But obviously those decisions allow for a roadmap to be created for any woman who wants to earn more money. But that going through each of those decisions, she can find 25 different ways to earn more money than the average man should she wish to. However, each of those decisions come with trade-offs. When you move quickly, when you work extra hours, oftentimes you don't enjoy it as much when you work in certain fields like hazardous occupations. Most people don't enjoy dying as much. And so the outcome of doing these things that earn more money do not necessarily lead to a better life. So I interviewed top women who have succeeded in the world in terms of financial success, and I say to them, if you were to talk to your granddaughter and advise her as to what you would do over again, what would you do differently? What would you do the same? I always say granddaughter because your children never listen. So now I'm going to ask us, though, to test out this thesis in our own lives right here in the room. So I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. I'm going to ask you to stand up if you fit a certain description. I'm going to ask you to look around and get a sense as to whether there are more men than women standing up. And I'm going to be asking you to count the number of times that you stand up. So keep track of the number of times that you stand up. So at the end, I'll be asking for some calculations so we can see right here in this room the different decisions or the similar decisions that men and women make. So I'm going to ask you to stand up if you work in a field of technology or the hard sciences, such as pharmacology or the hard sciences or in computer sciences or engineering. So stand up if you work in one of those fields. Okay, we have maybe 7 men and no women in this room working in technology, the hard sciences. Each of these are decisions that men versus women make, and each time you stand up, those are one of the indicators of what leads to high pay. Second, stand up if you are working in a field that is hazardous for at least 2, or have worked in a field that is hazardous for at least 2 or more years of your life. Stand up. Okay, there are 2 men that have done that and 2 women. We're even on the hazardous pay. Very good. Stand up if you work in a field that exposed you to the wind, the rain, and the snow, what I call an exposure profession, for at least 2 years of your life. Stand up if you've done that. There are about 4, 6, 9 men and 2 women. Stand up if you work in a field in which you cannot psychologically check out at the end of the day. So, for example, a corporate attorney can't usually check out at the end of the day. A librarian usually can check out at the end of the day. Stand up if you work in a field in which you cannot check out at the end of the day. Okay, we have about 60% of the men and about 40% of the women, maybe moving up to 45% of the women. Okay, thank you. Stand up if you work in a field that is less fulfilling than a field in which you would choose to work in had you won the lottery. Stand up if you work in a field that is less fulfilling than a field you would choose to work in had you won the lottery. That's about 80% of the men and about 15% of the women. Stand up if you work in a field requiring you to take considerable financial and emotional risks, such as a venture capitalist or a salesperson versus an investment banker or a bank teller. Stand up if you work in a field requiring you to take considerable financial and emotional risks. Interesting, small percentage of people. I would have expected the CATO Institute would have attracted a higher percentage of that. 2, 4, 6 people working in fields that attract have financial and emotional risk being serious, all males, no females. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I looked right past you. My apologies. And exactly. And speaking up after that, too. I applaud you. Stand up if you work in a field in which you work the worst shifts during the worst hours. So, for example, if you're a private practice MD and you work the shifts, late shifts or during the night, or if you work in a factory and work shifts like from midnight to 5, 6, 7 in the morning, stand up if you work the worst shifts during the worst hours. Okay, one person.
You know, this is a Washington policy wonk.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
This is hardly representative America.
Yeah, but even within the framework of, thank you, 2 women doing that. Even within the framework of this, we can see a significant male-female difference, obviously. Stand up if you work in a field that requires constant updating. For example, an engineer versus, say, a French language scholar. About 95% of the men and about 55, 60% of the women, okay? Stand up if you work in a subfield that has even more of these 9 characteristics. So, for example, if you're a nurse, but your subfield is a nurse anesthetist, you would have a lot of these other 9 characteristics that I mentioned, working in technology, working maybe tough hours, that type of thing. Or if you're a doctor, but you're a cardiac surgeon, you'd have a lot of those characteristics of working in technical fields, may not be fulfilling because you're working with death or dying, versus a psychiatrist working in a field that's more fulfilling comparatively. So stand up if your subfield increases some of the things I just talked about, like working even longer hours, working in tougher risks or whatever. Stand up if your subfield increases the things I've just been talking about. Stand up. Only your subfield, like say you're a nurse anesthetist as opposed to just a nurse, or say you're a doctor but you're a cardiac surgeon would be your subfield. Okay. Okay, almost nobody fits in that category. Stand up if you work more than 40 hours a week. Stand up if you work more than 40 hours a week. Okay, here we have about 80% of the men and about 65, 70% of the women. Now stand up if you work more than 60 hours a week. 60 hours a week. We're down to about 9 men and 3 women as I count. Thank you. Stand up if you have more than 20 years experience in your current occupation. 20 years experience in your current occupation. Okay, there we could get about 14 men and about 4 women. Stand up if you have more than 10 years of uninterrupted experience with your current employer. This is two differences from the former one: uninterrupted experience and with your current employer. Stand up. Okay, we have about 15 men and about 3 women. Stand up if you worked 51 or 52 weeks last year. That is, if you took 2 weeks of vacation, you're not in this group. So stand up if you worked 51 or 52 weeks last year. Okay, so this is sort of like stand up if you're crazy. That's very good. So we're about even on that issue there. Okay. Stand up if you were absent less than 2 days last year. Stand up if you were absent less than 2 days last year. It's about 8 men and 2 women. Okay. Stand up if you commute more than 25 miles round trip to work each day. If you commute more than 25 miles round trip, that's round trip commute, to work each day. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 men and 2, 4, 5 women. Okay. Stand up if you live in a city you do not wish to live in because you are needed there by your employer. Stand up if you live in a city you do not wish to live in because you are needed there by your employer. About 4 men and about 2 women. Stand up if you travel more than 5 days per month on your job. Stand up if you travel more than 5 days per month on your job. Oh, we only have 2 insane people in this room, except for me, 3. Stand up if you are a VP or above, working in a bottom line position, contributing directly to your company's profits and losses. For example, sales, marketing, investing, financial management. I'll repeat that. Stand up if you are a VP or above, vice president or above, working in a bottom line position, contributing directly to your company's profits and losses, sales, marketing, investing, financial management. Stand up.
It's Washington. You could just say stand up if you work in a company.
A company, right. Yes, 1, very good. Touché. Very good. Stand up if you are with a company or organization with more than 1,000 employees and your responsibility is national, that is nationwide for all your employees, like a national buyer at Nordstrom's versus a local buyer. Okay, we have 2 women and 2 men. Wait, is it 3 men and 2 women? Okay. And stand up if you are paid on commission. I know this is Washington. Nobody. 1 person who's a woman and 1 who's a man. Okay. So, okay, what I've just gone over is 21 of the 25 measurable differences between men and women. How many of you did, in fact, remember to keep track of the number of times you stood up? Okay, only about a quarter of the audience did keep track of that. Then do the best that you can to estimate. How many stood up at least 10 times? Raise your hand if you stood up, you think about 10 times or more. And how many stood up 10 times or fewer? Well, obviously everybody else by definition. Good question, Warren. How many people stood up at least 6 times? Okay, about 75% of the men and about 15% of the women. So we get, even in the context of this room, a great deal of the differences between men and women. When you're out in Middle America, where there's a greater percentage of people working in corporations and companies, you see a great deal of difference, particularly in the areas of the choices of fields. The choices of fields are the fields that earn the most are clearly engineering and computer sciences, and yet and women in those fields, in every single one of those fields, with just a couple of exceptions, in the subfields of engineering and the subfields of computer sciences, earn more than men do. So one of the things that I discovered, and even without the other things like greater commutes, doing work in the hazardous aspects of those fields, like people who are in hazardous fields are much, much more likely to be men. As you know, 93% of people who die at work are men. So if you have a technical field and a hazardous field, the chances of a man working in that are much greater. In each of these areas, there's a certain percentage increase that normally occurs if you increase your involvement in those fields. So for example, if a person puts in more hours per week, the average person who puts in more hours per week, if they put in 44 hours a week, what would be your guess as to how much more they make than a person putting in 34 hours a week? 44 versus 34. What would be your guess? 50% more, 10% more? 20% more? Anybody else? 50% more? It's close to 100% more. And the implications of that are enormous. The average male works 3 hours, the average full-time working male works 3 hours more per week than the average full-time working female. That alone accounts for 70% of the pay gap difference. But looked at in terms of opportunities for women and for men, if a person who works 44 hours a week makes almost twice as much as a person working 34 hours a week, not usually at the same job, of course, but a person working 44 hours a week usually is able to leverage that extra commitment into getting different types of jobs, working with different types of companies that want the person with greater amounts of flexibility. Look at what that implies for family decisions. A child is about ready to come into a family that doesn't have children, and we usually make a decision the woman usually makes one of 3 decisions. She either decides to work full-time, be full-time involved with the children, or do some combination of both. The man makes 3 decisions also. He decides to work full-time, or to work full-time, or to work full-time. And so they usually generate among those 3 options. And so the women who, but one option that's available when we know that you earn almost twice as much by working 44 versus 34 hours a week is that the woman who is career-oriented go out and be full-time involved with her career. If she has children, that her husband stay home, focus on his career, focus on the family, focus on moving with the woman's career, supporting the woman. But that means, of course, a tremendous difference in the way we socialize men and women. It means that when we socialize women who are interested in being high-powered women, that the woman might make the automatic assumption that she will marry a high-powered man. She can marry a high-powered man, and it can work out if she and he are not going to have any children. But if she's going to have children and he's going to have children, then usually the combination of family and work does better. She ends up happier if she's with a man who is focused on raising those children rather than a nanny being the one that raises the children. The children grow up more effectively. Single fathers do a very good job raising children, and fathers who are stay-at-home dads do a very good job raising children. In both cases, the children turn out better than when the reverse is the case. And so on 26 different areas of measurement. So we have lots of options to run the world, our decision-making in the family differently. The most important single decision that one makes, aside from these 25 decisions, are actually not any one of these 25 decisions. The most important single career decision that I found is the choice of a spouse. In other words, if you want to figure out what you want to do with your life in terms of balancing career and family, the person you choose as your partner is the most important single decision you make in that regard. I'll be happy to sort of entertain more on that later, but I want to move on to some of the other things that are needed to be considered. So the focus of my research was looking at these 25 differences, looking at the discrimination that still remains against women in the workplace, looking at the discrimination that is never looked at that is against men in the workplace, looking at the power of women and men to attract money that is not workplace derived, such as what I call genetic celebrity power, the ability of a beautiful woman to attract income in a lot of different ways that is not available for most men in the world. And so those were some of the sort of foci of that. What got me into all of this research was when I was on the board of Now in New York City. which I was on for 3 years. I used to wear the 59-cent pin. Most of you are too young to remember what that 59-cent pin was about. But for those of us aged people, that was a pin we used to wear that suggested that men earned $1 for each 59 cents that women made in the workplace. And we all believed that the gap between that dollar and that 59 cents was discrimination against women. And I was one of the people who very strongly believed that and protested against that discrimination. But one day I sort of asked myself a question that sort of got me into the type of trouble that Larry Summers got into at Harvard. I asked myself this question. I said, if men got paid $1 for each 59 cents that women got paid for the same work, why would anybody hire a man? And then I pressed myself a little bit further on that issue, and I said, well, I'm just going to go out and form an all-female firm, because obviously then I can produce things for 59 cents that other firms have to sell for $1. But I figured that maybe somebody thought of that before me, and I started asking, maybe there's something else to the whole situation besides that, because clearly, as I thought more carefully about it, if a company did hire all men and it cost them $1, and other companies hired all women and it cost them 59 cents to produce the same product, that capitalism has built into it a punishment for people who are stupid enough to discriminate. If you're stupid enough to discriminate and hire the man when the woman can produce the same product for about half that amount, you're going to be soon losing business. And the punishment will be being put out of business or going broke. And so that in a way the government wasn't necessarily needed, perhaps, I asked myself, to do what was already built into the structure of capitalism, which was to punish people who discriminated, who exercised that discrimination in terms of hiring people who were less productive for the same work and paying them more money. So I started thinking about that, and then I said, well, then maybe, if that's the case, there may be what other factors are involved that separate out men's work from women, the decisions that men make versus the decisions that women make, and could they account for the pay gap? So as I started looking at that and realizing that there's that men work 3 hours more than women and in the workplace, and I realized, and seeing that accounted for 70% of the pay gap, I started looking at each of these other issues and seeing that even 10, 15 years ago, we had very interesting data about men and women that no one has ever heard of. So, for example, or very few people have ever heard of, one example was I started looking at the differences between never married women and never married men. It made sense to me that if it wasn't gender discrimination, that maybe never married men and never married women would earn more similar amounts to each other if it was about decisions around family that was creating differences in outcome. So I went back to Jesse Bernard's book, Future of Marriage, written 30 some odd years ago, found in an appendix to that the fact that never married women earned more than never married men. Never married women 30 years ago earned more than never married men. So I was wondering if that still was the same. And then some of my feminist colleagues rightly and accurately said to me, Warren, the reason that never married women maybe do earn more than never married men is because, let's face it, never married women are winners and never married men are losers. And while losers and winners is a pretty tough way of putting it, what was true about what my feminist colleagues told me was that never married women did tend to work more hours per week than never married men. And never married women, on average, were more educated than never married men. So I controlled for education, and I controlled for hours worked. And I found that today, men who are never married, so follow all of this here, men who are never married and never had children earn 85% of what women earn who are never married and have never had children. When education is controlled for, when income is controlled for, and age is controlled for. So I suddenly had a new way of looking at the workplace. So I said, if that's the case, then there should be a number of fields in which women maybe out-earn men, even as a whole, as a rule, and found, in fact, that there were more than 90 fields in which women out-earn men. And that started getting me thinking of something different. If there are 90 fields in which women out-earn men, and all the newspaper discussions and media discussions were focusing on women as being discriminated against, we were putting our binoculars on the areas of discrimination against women, and we were missing tremendous opportunities for women. And so I started looking at and putting my binoculars on opportunities for women. And not only did I find there were 90 fields in which women out-earned men, but I also found that there were 39 very large fields in which women out-earned men by at least 5%. And I started seeing that there were fields like, and I discovered many other things in those fields. I found out that pharmacists are now earning more than medical doctors because of HMOs lowering the amount of income that medical doctors were making. So I started looking at fields that were user-friendly to women, that fit some of these categories that women usually decide to choose for. Found that investment bankers who are females not only do extremely well, but they significantly out-earn male investment bankers. Found that the dental hygienist will be one of the really major growing fields in the next 10 to 12 years. And dental hygienist is one of those fields that, well, think about it. Raise your hand if you would prefer a man's fingers in your mouth to a woman's fingers in your mouth. Raise your hand if you'd prefer a woman's fingers in your mouth to a man's fingers in your mouth. The common denominator, raise your hands, come on. Either way, and the great majority of people do prefer women's fingers in their mouth, whether they're a woman or a man. And if you think about how many of you have had dental hygienists who are men? Just 2 people in the room. How many of you have had dental hygienists who are women? And so what we realize is that there are a lot of fields, particularly fields that involve touching people or looking at people naked from both sexes, that completely discriminated against men. A man who wants to, so I asked my dentist about this, and I said, would you hire a male dental hygienist? And he looked at me, he knows what I write about, and he smiled and he said, actually, I did have a male who's a dental hygienist. 10% of people who get dental hygienist training are men. He said, I did have a man just the other day who called me who was a dental hygienist. I said, okay, what did you tell him? I said, sorry. I said, was that because you had no openings? And he said, no, it's because my customers will not want a man being a dental hygienist. And in a lot of areas like this, think about a massage. Would you rather raise your hand if you'd prefer to have a massage by a man? Raise your hand if you'd prefer to have a massage by a woman. Okay. As a rule, massage therapists find that if they're a man, they have a much harder time getting a job as a massage therapist or being used as often. Think about OBGYNs. 20, 30 years ago, before the Boston Women's Health Collective started helping women understand the value of people attending to you in a different way, we had almost all OBGYNs were males. But today, almost all of our OBGYNs are females. But it goes in a much more subtle type of way. And if we go to Walmart, and we hear now 1.5 million people are suing Walmart for discrimination against women. But when I started looking more carefully at the lawsuit's case, I found that in all the departments of Walmart in which there is no skills needed, like they're not an auto mechanic, not maintenance, or no physical labor required, like security or risking of life, in all those departments, the people who were hired mostly were which sex? Women. So women's apparel, 99% women. Men's apparel, 93% what? Women. In every single department of Walmart, there were 90% or more women when no skills were required. So what then happens is that you then have people, because of this discrimination against men, it forces men to get skills in order to be hired. Having gotten skills in order to be hired, those skills are able to be leveraged to be promoted more quickly. And so you then have what appears to be discrimination against women, when in fact the initial discrimination is very clearly against men at Walmart or in many other areas of the country. We see this in elementary school teaching. It is very difficult to ask any friend of yours that has a degree in elementary school teaching who's applied for a job. With the fear of male sexuality, there's a great deal of fear of hiring men as nursery school teachers or discrimination against women. You can understand it, but it's still a form of discrimination. And so the difficulty is that our children don't have, especially children in urban areas that are more likely to grow up in, especially poor urban areas, that are more likely to grow up in female-only households. They go from female-only households to female-dominated school systems, and then we wonder why they join gangs for the purpose of having a male role model. So a lot needs to sort of be reconsidered within that framework. I started asking myself the question, because another feminist objection that came up to me constantly was, Warren, it's not so much about supply and demand. Male bosses can be so prejudiced that they can sort of discriminate against women because they just plain value women less than men. So I started asking myself the question, okay, let's look then at companies in which women were their own bosses, in which women were self-employed. When I first started the research on that, in firms that women owned, women made 29% of what men made. That went up to 35%, and today it's at 49%. So in other words, when women have male bosses or bosses, they're far more likely to earn much more close to what men earn than when women are their own bosses. And the reason for that is when we look more closely at self-employed women versus self-employed men who own their own businesses, we find that the goals of self-employed men and women are different. The goals of self-employed women are usually to have a balanced life in which they can connect with their children and still earn money. The goals of self-employed men are much more likely to be money-focused. So it's not that there's discrimination that's the issue, and it's not that this should be any different. It's that women and men choose different foci in their work, and particularly we see this in the self-employment. So then I got another objection, which was that, well, maybe it's really part-time women. So I looked at the 2004 data for part-time women from the raw data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. I found that part-time women who earn 110% of what part-time men earn, working the same number of hours part-time. So I try to cut the data each way and look carefully at each of the dimensions of that. What I began to start seeing, if this book came to start evolving into having one theme, is that I began to start seeing that pay is not about getting power per se. That pay is about giving up power to get the power of pay. That is, each of the times that many of you stood up to do things, working more hours, not choosing. Almost every man here in the room said that you would not choose to work in the field you're working in if you won the lottery. So you gave up one dream, the dream of doing what was most fulfilling, to get a different thing accomplished, which was earning money. And so men, as a rule, have learned to define power very differently than women. Women have learned to define power largely through the help of the women's movement, and since the women's movement, as figuring out how to have control of their life, how to look inside of themselves, decide what their values are, decide how to become more of the person that you would like to be. In my opinion, that's the correct definition of power. Men have learned to define power slightly differently, feeling obligated to earn money that somebody else spends while we die sooner. And it's not I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek there, but it's also, there's a fair amount of truth to that as we sort of look at the different decisions that men and women have learned to make. So when we've looked at men, so if we go out here to take a cab back to our offices afterwards today, the chances are very good that the cab driver will be what? A male. And ask that cab driver how many hours per week he works. On average, it will be between 65 and 70. Ask that cab driver the next question. Would you choose to work this number of hours per week? You'll just about be thrown out of the cab. Then ask the cab driver the question, why do you work this number of hours per week? And the cab driver will usually tell you some version of the following. I'm working this number of hours per week so my children don't have to work this number of hours per week, so my children can go to college, so my children can have advantages that I don't have, so my wife can take care of the children, so that my wife can have food on the table and the mortgage payment made. The mistake I think that we made in the last 30 years was assuming that people who had money had power, that people had money as a result of privilege. And what I began to understand as I did the research for Why Men Earn More was that people had money because they sort of oftentimes made sacrifices to get the power of pay. So I began to start seeing what I call the pay paradox. And the pay paradox was basically that men earn money, therefore men have more power, and men earn money, therefore men have less power. And women earn less money, therefore women have less power. Women earn less money, therefore women have more power. Because in the process of earning less money, oftentimes the money that was earned was less because there was a greater amount of fulfillment in the occupational choice. The greater the amount of fulfillment, the greater the supply, and the greater amount of fulfillment, often the less the demand. So teachers don't get paid as much as we often say they should because more people would prefer to be a teacher or a librarian than more people enjoy reading books than smelling garbage. So we have to pay our garbage collector more. Even if the garbage collector isn't as well educated, then we have to pay the librarian or the teacher because the librarian or the teacher, the great majority of people prefer being a librarian or a teacher. Therefore, that increases the supply in relation to the demand. Basically, I began to see that it's simpler solution for us to blame men about the pay gap than it is to engineer our own bridge to higher pay. And yet, when people do engineer their own bridge to higher pay, women today out-earn men when all those things are controlled for. And you will see statistic after statistic that will appear to disprove this. You will see that male doctors earn more than female doctors, and you'll say, that Warren Farrell guy, he was wrong. And yet, as you look more carefully, you'll see that the male doctors are more likely to be cardiac surgeons, and the female doctors are more likely to be psychiatrists. And then as you look more closely, you say, I got you again, Warren. The cardiac surgeons who are male out-earn the cardiac surgeons that are female. Is that true? Yes, it's true. But when you look more closely, the cardiac surgeons that are male are more likely to work more hours per week as cardiac surgeons than the cardiac surgeons are female. And then you say, I'll control for the hours. You control for the hours. And you say, the males still out-earn those cardiac surgeons, still out-earn the female, maybe only by 1% or so, but it proves you're wrong, Warren. Then you control for private practice. The male cardiac surgeons are more likely to be in private practice. The female primary cardiac surgeons are more likely to work for a government agency or some type of public practice or an M.ö.o. or something along those lines. And as you control for all of those variables, that's when the women out-earn the men. And for me, the importance of this research and what intrigued me about it is I have two daughters, one 17 and one 18. They're entering the workplace. I want them to understand, take responsibility for their choices. I want them to be able to know where and how to make the choices that are productive for them and their lives, and be able to not walk around feeling angry at the world that men have basically figured out a system to get themselves to be paid more at the expense of women. If that exists at even the 0.5% level, we have to change that. And if that exists, it means we have a contempt for women that needs to be changed. But fortunately, it doesn't exist. And as I started doing the research on this, I became very pleased that the world was a little bit fairer than I thought it was when I started out in this work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Warren. We have time for questions. I'll let
Yes.
you call on people. Please wait for a microphone to come around so everybody can hear your question, including on the web broadcast.
I do questions and answers also a little bit differently than most people do. I believe that there's more resources in this room than me, and so I'm open to I'll ask you as you stand up and ask a question to let you know that I'm okay with a comment as well as a question. I'd like you to say your name so I can speak with you as a person rather than as an object to a lecturer or lecturer to object. And so, and then I will ask usually one or two other people to comment on that perspective, and then I will add my own perspective as well, so that we turn this into sort of a recognition that we all have perspectives and views that are worth hearing here. So is there anybody that would like to start out? Yes, say your name.
My name is
Can
June.
you stand up, June?
My name is June Myers.
Hi, June.
Thank you. Hi, my name is June Myers, and I'm not sure what the plural of this is, even though I'm female, but what do you think would happen if men could bear children, if men had uteruses or uteri? How would this impact your data? I mean, because we can
Yes.
choose to adopt now,
Yes.
but I think these choices were probably archetypally made a long time ago. And, you know, the hunter-gatherer, the homemaker. So if men could really have children, how would that impact your
Yes.
view of this?
Good. June's question is, if men could have children, how would that impact these findings? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Any feelings about it?
Aside from adoption.
Yes, aside from adoption? Yes. Say your name.
My name's Brad, and I really enjoyed your Myth of Male Power book.
Thank you,
Wanted to
Brad.
say that. I was just thinking about your interview you did with Ken Wilber.
I'm sorry, June. Brad, would you, I'm asking for comments on June's point, and then I'll come to a new point, okay? So you're right up after June. But right now, comments on June's point. If men could have children, how would things be different? Physically, June, you want them to answer? Oh, okay.
Not by adoption, because that changes.
Oh, I see. Physically have children. Say your name.
Hi, my name is Patrick. And if men had children, and the children would survive, men would have to have a completely different set of feelings.
Completely what?
Different set of feelings. Feelings similar to the ones that women have, which are evolution's way, in my opinion, to make sure that children survive, or a certain portion survive. So that the result, I think, would be that basically men would be pursuing strategies similar to those of women. And I believe that evolutionarily, two different paths have made sense
Yes.
to the two different sexes.
Yes.
And there's feelings and emotions that having children necessarily requires if those children are going to survive.
Very good insight and very important insight. Anybody else want to take it on before I give a perspective on it? Kathleen, is it? Is it Catherine? Sorry. Say your name, Catherine.
Catherine
And
Lewis.
Can you stand up?
Oh, sure. Well, I think that June's question raises an interesting point, which is sort of what I'm debating about the structure that you've built in your book, which is a lot of these choices aren't necessarily choices that people can make, that women or men can make. That, you know, to work longer hours or to have higher education or to be in a more scientific field is not necessarily a choice that any given woman could make. And I think that I've seen so many studies that women are working bad shifts and working in low-skilled industries, not making a lot of money. It seems to me that, yes, in an ideal world, it would be great if the man or the woman could choose to be the breadwinner, but I just wonder how much of that is the reality.
Yes. Good. Okay. Very excellent points. One more comment, then I'll add my comment to it. Say your name.
Yeah, Paul Shore. I hope I don't seem mean-spirited by essentially demolishing the question that was raised, but if men could have children, then they'd have to be fertilized by women. Otherwise, there couldn't be any genetic recombination with each new generation, and therefore each sex would be hermaphroditic, and therefore both sexes would be the same. Men would be women, and women would be men. So there would be no sex differences to account for. There would be only one sex in the human species.
Mm-hmm, yes. Very, very fascinating answer. Great. Yes. Okay, but let's work with sort of the spirit of that question, if I may, June. That's a very good answer and a thoughtful answer, by the way. Let's take it down to sort of the practicality of, let's say men were raising children more frequently than they are, as opposed to having them, which gets us into all the biological dimensions of that. But so I'll work with that in just a moment. But for a moment, let me say that it is true that probably what you're saying about the energy of men and women has become different in part because children need it from women, that type of nurturing and that connection. And let me spend a minute on that before I get into the raising of children issue. One of the dilemmas that we have is that men have learned to love the family by being away from the love of their family. That is, men have learned to love the family by being at work. And as men are at work, we develop characteristics that are functional for the workplace that are often dysfunctional for loving our family. So, for example, a good CEO has to pay very careful attention as someone is talking to him or her about is this the right market? Where can this be placed? Is this the right person to buy from? And a good CEO listening to a sales presentation is going to be having to do 30 or 40 variables being juggled in his or her mind. Now, if I'm that CEO and I come home and June, you are my wife, and I listen and you're talking to me and I'm juggling 30 variables in my mind as you're talking to me, you don't feel very loved, you don't feel very heard. The emotional, what I need to do as a person who loves you, or if I loved you, if I knew you, if I would be, yes, right, would be to emotionally completely engage with your feelings, your fears, your hopes, and your words as you're speaking them. That is what women are able to do. So women being with children tend to be trained to do that more frequently, and whether that's biologically inherited or not is another issue. So that's sort of the biology of it. But the socialization of it and the outcome for children is astonishing. I made quick references before that children raised by single fathers do better in 26 different areas of measurement than children raised by single mothers. That is, just like many women who work in the workplace add qualities to the workplace that the workplace would not have, that lead to women being so much safer in the workplace than men are. So, for example, in the Marines, 400 people have died. What's the percentage of men that have died in the Marines and women that have died in the Marines? 100% men. 400 plus men have died, 0 women. So every single person in the Air Force who has died has been what? A male. Every single one. Only one person in the Navy that has died in the war in Iraq has been a woman. This is all within the framework of the war in Iraq. My point is there that women can sometimes, people who aren't trained in a certain area, can enter into, in this case, a hazardous occupation and treat the occupation in a way that produces different outcomes. Men raising children do extremely well in areas we would be shocked to find the case. So children, the more contact a child has with his father or her father, the more likely that child is to be empathetic. Now think about that. Normally we say empathy is from the woman to the child. Are women more empathetic than men? My personal opinion, yes. But empathy does not create empathy. It turns out that good boundary enforcement is more likely to force the child to think of somebody else's needs besides the child's needs, and the child is forced by the consequences of good boundary enforcement to think of somebody else besides himself or herself. So practically speaking, what June's question opens us to is a world where there's a lot of potential encouragement for women to be entering the workplace at high focus levels and contributing positively to that, and men to be entering the home market, the home place, and raising children. But we still aren't training our daughters to do this. So, for example, when I go to almost any party, and I walk into that party, and there's a single woman, I overhear the host say, oh, by the way, that guy over there is, he's in law school, and he's going to really be, he's right at the top of his class. That person's working in a law firm. That person is working for the government at this level. That person is working as a surgeon at doing this. And she's given all the human doing characteristics of men, not the human being characteristics of men. I don't hear very many hosts saying to a woman, by the way, notice that fellow over there, he's asking a woman questions, and he's paying attention to her answers. And he's not pretending to know more or having already known the answer. And notice that he's not talking with the most attractive woman at the party. He's talking with an average-looking woman at the party. And notice that as he's talking with her, he's not womanizing with his eyes the more attractive women. That's the type of man who's showing personality characteristics that suggest that he would be very able to support you to be the type of top career woman that you might want to be. And if a woman wants to have it all, she needs to be re-socialized to value those characteristics in men so that she selects for those men and doesn't wait for that man to select her, that she's willing to take him out, pay for him, because that would symbolize the type of man who's open to being supported economically by a woman. But most women, when they contemplate supporting a man economically, lose respect for the man, and they back away from it, even if they aren't paid for on the first date. They sort of start shrinking. But that's probably a combination of biological and socialization. But it really is. We can't separate biology from socialization. If you and I were married and you were our daughter, and you had and we started seeing you going out with a couple of doctors and lawyers, and then you were going, but you had this really strong interest in this artist who was really not going to be likely to make much of a living at all, and so we encouraged you to we made things a little bit easier for you to be with the doctor and the lawyer, less easy for you to be with the artist. And your girlfriend started saying, what about that doctor and lawyer? And all of that reinforced it. Those are all socialization forces that I'm talking about. But now you make the choice, let's say, of the doctor. You have children, and what type of choice is that? It's a biological choice. The socialization pressures you in to biological choices that create biological outcomes, your children. And so the children that you have from that socialization pressure become the children of the doctor and the lawyer, not the artist. And so so when people argue, is it biology or is it nature? Is it nurture or is it nature? My answer is yes. It's both. It's overlapping. It's not able to be separated. So does all that make sense in terms of, so what this book, to me, what Why Men Earn More opens us up to is options for our daughters to have it all, but not to have it all by marrying men who are superstars, like when they want to be superstars. If you want to be a superstar woman, marry a man who will support you if you want children. It's fine for a superstar woman to marry a superstar man if there's no desire for children, but not if there is. And okay, say your name. Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute. I skipped Brad, and then I'll come to yourself. Brad? And is it Brad? Is that
yeah, it's Brad. Sorry, Warren. It was, I was going to get into the difference between the hoe and the plow, which it'd be too complicated to get into, but
okay.
But thanks for coming back to me. But
okay. Say your name.
Hi, I'm Christina.
Christina.
Sort of building off what you were last saying, if you take an anthropology class, a bioanthropology class, they'll say, women tend to value achievement in men tend to value other things in
Beauty
women.
and youth,
And
right?
so I'm sorry?
Beauty and youth.
Beauty
basically.
and youth, exactly. And so I'm wondering if you think that there is still some inequity in what you're talking about, and that there might be greater trade-offs for a woman if they adopt the 25 ways to increase their pay, that there's another side of it that a woman might not be able to find, a very high-achieving woman would find it more difficult to find a man that would take the more traditional supporting role. And so that there's greater risk, that there's a greater trade-off in trying to earn more money because they'll be less likely to find a supportive spouse or something like
Yes.
that than a man would.
Very good question. Anybody have any thoughts on Christina's question, and then I'll give my perspective on it. Okay. That question is so important that I ask that question on almost every radio show that I've been on for the past 10 years, which is a lot of radio shows. And I get every woman in this room will be very happy to hear the answer to this. I get about 10 women about 10 men calling me saying that they would love to be able to be supported by a woman, and they'd be happy to be fully involved with the children, do the cooking, do the cleaning, or if there's enough money, hire the cleaning to be done, figure out where she's moving to, move where the job requires her to move to, for each woman who calls in saying, I'm very open to supporting a man economically who works out of the home, who may or may not raise money, but who takes care of all the things that traditional women do. As of this point in history, it's very clear to me that actually men are more willing to make that adaptation than women are. Women get a great deal of pressure when they start going out with men who earn less. They get pressure from their parents. They get pressure from women friends. They get pressure from the stuff inside of themselves that says, "Am I valuing myself too little?" But the big caveat with men is this: a man will not feel comfortable doing that if he's picking up body language from the woman that suggests that she really does not respect him for doing that. Men are prisoners of female approval and respect. If women said we want men to go around walking on their hands, men would begin to have contests about walking on their hands. And then they start jumping on one hand to show that they're better than the men that walked on one hand. And they have marathons for how far they could walk. So that one of the things I find out that is true about men is if a woman says, "Sweetie, I really value what you contribute to your children," but at the next party, that man notices that his wife is eyeing a man who's a Nobel Prize winner or a CEO or very high achieving, and her eyes are sort of dilating in ways that suggest that she's interested in him, he begins to become insecure. And the woman says, it's not that I want a successful man, I just don't want an insecure man like my husband. And the whole cycle starts and it deteriorates. So a lot of, if a woman is interested in choosing a man like that, a lot of internal work needs to be done about, am I really okay with that? Now, men have the same problem in reverse. A man can say to a woman, but it's not on this issue. I can say to a man says to me, Warren, I want a woman who's warm and tender and loving and caring and has a good sense of humor and is fair and is kind, and I just can't find a woman out there like that. And I say, oh, I have a woman who's exactly like that. She does happen to be 300 pounds and 75 years of age. And he suddenly goes, well, wasn't quite thinking of that. So men's Achilles heel is in the beauty and the youth area, just like women's Achilles heel is in that type of selection in that area. Does that all make sense? So, if it doesn't, just challenge me. Okay, great. Okay, fine. Anybody else have any thoughts? Yes, right in the back. Say your name, and can you stand up, please?
My name is Shauna Gamache, and
is it Sean?
That's Shauna.
Shauna, right.
I'm just curious, as someone who's maybe of the younger generation here, and
not an old person like me.
No, yeah. And as someone whose husband's actually already moved 3 times for me for work, I'm just curious what kind of changes you are seeing with the younger generation. Where you see this trend going with, the emergence of such factors as the sensitive man, and also the opening of these fields that you're talking about, like everything from the Marines to the financial sector for women.
Yes.
Where you see this going?
Yes. Well, first of all, anybody else have any thoughts? Many of you are younger than I am, and so what are your experiences with people your age? Another old man, David. Say I know you, David, so I know your first name is David.
David Levy, yeah. Well, Warren, you've been on the cutting edge of this now for a number of years. In relation to what the woman just said. Shauna, do you feel you are making a dent, or are these ideas making a dent, and if so, how much? And is there any chance for any general acceptance of these unusual ideas, but accepted by many people who understand you and what you're saying?
Yes, well, thank you. Anybody else on whether things are changing for younger people? And I will be happy to. Yes, Peter.
I've had about 5 careers, and I've lived in. I think it's 5 or 6 careers.
Microphone, please.
Peter, you take the microphone.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm 65. I've had about 5 careers. I've lost count. Including army, research, university, and stuff like that, and. I've lived in 4 continents, and we're being globalized, and this is happening. And what people need to do is start from a young age making choices, both men and women, and have the courage to make a choice and make a decision. That's just one thing on that personal side.
Thank you,
I wish
Peter.
your book might have been called maybe The Paradox. I'd have liked that. Maybe call it The Paradox.
The pay paradox?
Yeah, The Pay Paradox.
That was the first name of the book.
Yeah, right. We call it Why Men. That's the other thing. I mean, we are men. We're stuck in these careers, or were stuck in these careers for 30 years, because we thought we had to earn more money.
Yes.
But, you know, every single man just has to make a choice and, you know, put his life first, which is what women apparently do.
Yes, good. Thank you, Peter. Okay, Shauna, the good news and the bad news. Okay, the things that I see changing are clearly women are far more desirous of making money. Women are clearly saying and understanding that they need to take responsibility for the possibility that they are going to be earning their own income. That's what's changing, and that's wonderful, and that's good. What is not changing and is creating some deeper problems than almost anyone has looked at. What is not changing is that when women marry, and I ask women, let's check this out here in the audience to make sure I'm right about this. I ask you to close, everybody here, just close your eyes for a moment and visualize your wedding day. If you're from California, you can choose any number of your wedding days. If you've had more than one wedding, just choose, maybe choose your first marriage. And imagine your spouse on your wedding day. Now imagine me coming up to you and saying, tell me what's right, what's true for you. Do you believe that your husband or your wife will earn consistently more than you during your lifetime together? Do you believe and this is the belief you had on your wedding day. Makes no difference what actually happened, but the belief on your wedding day was your best prediction that your spouse-to-be would earn more or less than you during your years together. I ask you to open your eyes. If you're women and you have been married, raise your hand about whether you believed on your wedding day that your partner would probably make as much or more than you. Raise your hand if you believed on your wedding day that your partner would earn less than you. Okay? So about 85% of the people have been married. Men, raise your hand if you believed that you would earn more, as much or more than your wife when you're on your wedding day. Raise your hand if you believed you would earn less than your wife on your wedding day. So, yes, so, only 2 men in the room believe that they would earn less than their wife. So that part, Shauna, has not changed very much. The problem that creates is that we have women earning more and more, but oftentimes marrying men who are not earning as much or are expected to earn as much, but in fact do not end up earning as much, and then there is a real problem that occurs. Usually the woman who expects the man to be earning more, who ends up becoming downsized while she becomes upsized, starts becoming dissatisfied internally, and that tends to lead to divorces. And so we've changed the society without changing the expectations of women or men about who is eligible for love. We have a lot of women. If we ask that question slightly differently, we get a very different answer. If I said, how many women have men friends or are living with men who are earning less, you'd see a large number of female hands go up. How many women are currently living with or are friends with men who are earning less? A much higher percentage of female hands go up. But when it comes to marriage, those women don't usually get married to those men unless they believe the men will be earning as much or more. So in those types of cohabitation or boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, there's a break-off, and men know, therefore, there will be, so the message to men is, there will be no love unless there's what?
Money.
There'll be no love unless there's money. And as long as men know that, then men, or feel that way, they don't know it, but they feel that way. As long as men feel that way, men will take an attitude toward money that will be different than the female attitude toward money. It will be very similar to the female attitude toward weight and toward looks and toward youth, where women know that there's no real love unless there's a reasonable weight, reasonable looks, and reasonable amount of youth. And both all sad things, probably both genetically selected for, but this is still the what's changing and what isn't, to answer Shauna's question. Does that respond to your question, Shauna?
Yeah, it does.
Thank you.
Let's take one last question.
Sure. Say your name.
Sharon Lee.
Sharon.
Having not read your book, I can only guess at how you did this analysis. But I sort of take issue with some of the fundamental statistical correlations that you're trying to make, or conclusions that you're trying to draw from these, because I don't know if you've controlled for certain things like ambition or things like that, but it seems like a woman who fits sort of all your criteria of being the cardiac surgeon who's willing to work as many hours as the male may have some other characteristics that you're not controlling for. And so I kind of find it a little disturbing that you're trying to wipe away that entire argument that women who have the same qualifications are in fact making, or you're wiping away the argument that women who have all the same characteristics and do the same exact job don't make a percentage of what a man would work, or a man would make. So maybe you can just
Absolutely.
clarify that a little bit.
First of all, is there anybody that has any thoughts on that before I give my perspective on that? Yes, Catherine. Catherine has interviewed me recently and has read my book, so I'd be interested to hear what you say.
Thanks. Well, on a similar point, I also was surprised that when you're looking at the situation that you mentioned earlier, nursery school teachers, that the small percentage of men in that field leads to the conclusion that men are discriminated against. And yet, when you look at investment bankers and you say there's a small percentage of women, why doesn't that also lead to the conclusion that women are discriminated against in that field?
Good, very good. Okay, I'll take Sean Lee's question first, and then segue into yours, Catherine. No one can control for all 25 of these variables, so I did the best I could to sort of look at sort of the different impacts of them. But among the variables that you were very perceptive enough to sort of put your fingers on is the question about goals and ambitions of the person, men and women to begin with. And that is one of the 25 differences that contributes to higher or lower pay than women. Women are much more likely, both who own their own businesses and also women at every age group, when Harris and Gallup polls ask them questions, and in every industrialized country, which is where we have good polls from, all have different goals than men do in the workplace. A much higher percentage of women want fulfillment, and they want flexibility. Usually a question that's not asked, but only when it's asked does it occur, is safety. They don't also want to take risks a great deal in their work. And I just reaffirmed all this with an American Management Association survey, which I asked all these questions about the 25 ways in that survey. And all these things turned out to be true among managers as of a few weeks ago who were asked these questions. So that predominantly women want fulfillment, they want flexibility for family purposes, they want safety, they want to work, but they don't usually want to work on average. They don't want to work more than 35 to 40 hours a week. Pay is important to them, but it's not not of primary importance. Even women who own their own businesses, only 27% say pay is a primary reason that they own their own business, whereas men, it's over 40% saying the same thing. So that's sort of like the larger picture of the differences in the goals area. On your question, Catherine, in terms of why do I conclude that men are nursery school teachers at such a small percentage, and that implies discrimination, and women are investment bankers at a small percentage, and that does not imply discrimination. The only way you can evaluate discrimination is to look carefully at percentages of applicants, what happens to those applicants when they apply, and also are there people that fear going into a field because they've gotten communication ahead of time that they are going to be discriminated against. And when very few men apply to be nursery school teachers because men sort of sense that they're not going to be accepted in that area. But the closest thing you can come to it in large numbers is men who do have elementary education backgrounds and apply to be elementary education teachers in grades 1st through 3rd. And there we have a lot of men saying that they cannot that they do not get, that they apply for those positions, but they are not accepted. Interestingly enough, that I had to gather only anecdotal evidence on that. There's not a single study done by any education institution that I could come up with that even asked schools what is the percentage of male versus female applications. It's just that all over the country, when I talk about these issues, men call me and say, I got an elementary education degree. One of them quit from being a very top-level government employee because everybody said that he was a great teacher. He had raised his own children, so he quit job, gave up pension, risked his wife's disapproval, became a teacher, got an elementary school education, called me on the radio and said, every single man that graduated with me could not get a job. I couldn't get a job. Everybody thinks I'm gifted as a teacher, but every single woman in my class got a job. So it's only data like that I ask the society to look more carefully at that issue. Does that answer your question, Catherine? Anything that I haven't answered about it? Okay, and check with me at lunch. If it's been wonderful talking with you, and feel free to sort of continue this dialogue as we join each other for lunch. Thanks for your thoughtful questions.
Thank you very much, Warren. We do have copies of Why Men Earn More outside, and we invite you to get one, and I'm sure Warren would be glad to sign them, and we'll be upstairs for lunch. And I remind you that we will have this forum available on our website, www.cato.org, if you want to go back and check any of the numbers and percentages or anything. Thank you.